Let's stop playing with this. Elvis Presley did not invent rock and roll. Neither did the Beatles. Neither did Led Zeppelin. Neither did the Rolling Stones. They got rich off it, but they did not create it. That part matters because the music that made them legends came from black people who never got paid like legends, never got protected like legends, and damn sure never got remembered like legends. That's not an accident. Black people built blues, jazz, and rock and roll in places nobody was watching. Churches, juke joints, cramped rooms after long work days with no contracts and no safety net. That pressure forced creativity most people never had to reach. That's why the sound was so raw, so emotional, so powerful. Then the moment that same sound was handed to white performers, everything changed. Radio opened up, TV showed up, money flooded in, history got rewritten. Same music, different faces, completely different rewards. And here's the part people don't like admitting out loud. If the hardest part was creating the sound and somebody else got rich just delivering it, then American music doesn't reward genius. It rewards access. So the question isn't whether black people invented these genres. The real question is whether people are ready to admit how America decided who gets paid for them. To really understand this, you have to look at where the music was being made before anyone was paying attention. Long before radio hits and record deals, black people were shaping sound in places that didn't count as the industry. Churches where music was the center of community. Juke joints where people went to feel human after being worked down all day. Small rooms where instruments were shared, songs were passed by ear, and nobody owned anything on paper. There were no lessons, no manuals, no protection, just repetition, experimentation, and feel. That's how the blues took shape. That's how jazz learned how to move. That's how rock and roll found its edge. These weren't polished environments, but they were creative ones. And pressure does something important. It forces originality. When there's no system to plug into, people build their own. New rhythms come from old traditions. New guitar sounds come from pushing cheap equipment past its limits. New vocal styles come from needing to be heard over noise, over hardship, over everything else. That's why the music felt different. It wasn't designed to fit in. It was designed to come out. And once you see that, it becomes harder to believe the idea that these genres just appeared, fully formed when they reached mainstream stages. What black people were doing in those spaces wasn't random noise. It was invention turning into structure. The blues wasn't just sad music, it was a system. Call and response patterns carried over from African traditions. Field hollers stretched into melody. Work songs turned into rhythm people could move to. Bending notes wasn't a stylistic choice, it was emotional language. Jazz took that foundation and added discipline and complexity, timing, improvisation, harmony. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington weren't just playing songs, they were building a new musical language in real time. Rock and roll didn't suddenly show up in the 1950s. It grew out of that same line. Black guitarists started playing louder, faster, dirtier, pushing instruments past what they were meant to do. Rhythm sections got tighter. Vocals got more aggressive. Performance became part of the sound. By the time the industry put a name on it, the work had already been done. These genres didn't come from theory or trend. They came from people experimenting, failing, fixing, and passing knowledge hand to hand until something new stuck. Here's the turning point people skip over. For a long time, This music was ignored on purpose. Blues, jazz, early rock. It was called race music. It stayed in black neighborhoods, on black radio, in black venues. Not because it wasn't good, but because the gatekeepers didn't think it could sell to a wider audience. Then something changed. White teenagers started listening anyway. They heard Chuck Berry. They heard Little Richard. They heard Muddy Waters. And suddenly the industry paid attention, not to the artists, to the sound. That's the moment everything shifted. Because once record labels realized the music could make serious money, the question stopped being, who made this? And became, who can we sell this through? That's when covers exploded. That's when white performers were pushed to the front. That's when the same songs, the same riffs, the same styles started showing up with different faces. The sound didn't move on its own. It was moved. And once that happened, control over the story moved with it. Once the industry realized the sound could sell, access became the deciding factor. Not talent, not originality. Access. Record labels already had relationships with radio stations, television shows, and distributors, and those doors didn't open equally for everyone. So instead of investing in the black artists who created the music, the industry took a faster route. They handed the same songs to performers who could move freely through those spaces. That's how Elvis records Hound Dog and becomes a superstar, while Big Mama Thornton, who wrote it and made it a hit, gets paid once and never owns it. That's how Pat Boone covers Little Richard and tops the pop charts, while the original stays confined to R&B radio. The music didn't change, the delivery did. White radio stations claimed their audiences wouldn't connect with black artists, but played white versions of black songs nonstop. Television followed the same logic. The result was simple and effective. The sound reached millions, but the people who created it stayed out of frame. And once access replaced authorship as the main requirement for success, the story of American music started drifting away from the people who built it in the first place. What made this gap last wasn't just fame, it was ownership. Most black artists didn't own their songs, their publishing, or their masters, not because they didn't care, but because the system wasn't built for them to understand or control it. Contracts were written in language nobody explained. Royalties were buried under expenses. Studio time, promotion, and distribution costs magically ate up profits. So even when black artists had hits, the money never really reached them. Meanwhile, white performers signed cleaner deals with major labels, had access to lawyers, and benefited from full national distribution. That's how careers turned into wealth on one side, and short moments turned into nothing on the other. The industry didn't need to steal songs outright. It just needed to own the paperwork. And once ownership was locked in, history followed the money. The artists who owned nothing faded out. The artists tied to profit stayed visible. Over time, people stopped asking who built the music and started assuming the people who owned it must have created it. Chunk 6. How the story got flipped. Once money and ownership were settled, the story started changing quietly. Radio playlists shaped memory. TV appearances shaped faces. Award shows shaped credibility. Over time, people stopped hearing the originals and only heard the versions that were pushed nationally. That's how the public began associating entire genres with the people they saw most, not the people who built them. Rock started looking white. Jazz started feeling high class. Blues started sounding old and distant. The music didn't change, the framing did. History books followed the same pattern. They highlighted the artists who broke into the mainstream and skipped over the ones who laid the groundwork. After a while, the origin story disappeared completely. New generations weren't taught where the sound came from, only who sold it best. And once that happens, a lie doesn't even need defending. It just becomes normal. This isn't just about what happened decades ago. It explains why the same patterns keep showing up. Even today, black artists are often praised for creativity, but still have to fight for ownership, control, and long-term payoff. The industry looks different on the surface, but the logic hasn't changed much. Innovation comes from the margins. Profit flows to whoever controls distribution. And when the story gets told later, it usually follows the money. That's why debates about credit, sampling, awards, and ownership never really go away. They're not new problems. They're old ones playing out in modern form. When people argue about who really deserves recognition, they're often reacting to a history they were never fully taught. And without that context, it's easy to miss how deep the pattern runs. Understanding where American music came from isn't about taking anything away from anyone. It's about finally seeing the full picture instead of the edited version. This isn't old history. The same pattern is still alive. Black people set the sound, the style, the energy, and then someone else scales it, markets it, and owns it. The names change, the platforms change, but the outcome stays familiar. Creativity comes from the bottom. Profit flows to the top. And when people say, that's just business, they're ignoring how uneven the playing field still is. Because ownership decides who gets remembered, who gets paid, and who gets erased. When black creators don't control their work, the culture keeps moving without them, and the story gets told like they were never there in the first place. This isn't just a music story. This is a pattern. Black people created the sound. Others owned the systems, and history rewarded ownership, not originality. That's how entire genres got disconnected from the people who built them. That's how names got remembered while others got erased. And that's why this still matters, because culture shapes identity. When the creators disappear from the story, people start believing they never existed at all. This video isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about putting the truth back where it belongs. Because once you understand how black music was taken, rebranded, and sold, you start seeing the same playbook everywhere else. Fashion, language, style, innovation. So here's the real question. If black people built the foundation of American music but never controlled the system that profited from it, who do you think American culture really works for? And do you call that coincidence or design? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still thinks rock, blues, and jazz just happened. And if you want more stories that connect the dots they never taught us, make sure you subscribe, because this history doesn't stay buried unless we let it.